Yeah, hello everyone. I want to talk today about Sloterdijk's What Happened in the 20th Century. And the reason why I looked into that is because Sloterdijk is, to me, the greatest philosopher that the 20th century has produced. And his reflections on events are always incredibly interesting. And I just wanted to look up what he had to say about evolution, especially with regard to Darwin. And yeah, he has his individual take on that and thinks that human beings are a very special case of evolution where the simple principles of survival of the fittest does not apply because human beings build cultures where they are rewarded to be in the state of the unfittest but most agile in sense that they always learn. And so we receive then something like a nesting society, a culture that takes care of its individuals, like the good shepherd of its sheep in the Bible. And the interest of these cultures is also to somehow preserve a constant state of immaturity where you are subjected to a constant imperative of learning. And that is what it is basically about. And this is what I want to talk about today with regard to the text. Yeah, I just have to turn off some things here and then we should be able to start. So the chapter here is found on page 216, I believe, and it's called From the Domestication of the Human Being to the Civilizing of Cultures, answering the question of whether humanity is capable of taming itself. So he uses here terms of Nietzsche that basically imply that humans are taming themselves. It's a history of self-taming. And he starts here in particular with the anthropological discovery that human beings can and must adopt relations to themselves and to those like them that are best described by such words as taming, breeding, and tending. And who was the father of that? Basically, it was Plato, who figured out that humans cannot simply be what their nature has given to them, but their basic characteristic is that they are not what they are. So, in another sense, the paradox of the human nature is that they don't have a clearly defined nature. So the definition of human nature is not having a clear definition in terms of its nature, which obviously constitutes a paradox. And Sloterdijk goes here deeper into, describes it as the art of shepherding that also the Christian culture then has turned into one of its leitmotifs. Culture is a shepherd to the sheep. And this then is our role. And I mean, one sees already clearly the connection to Nietzsche, who will say that the modern virtue is basically to make us tame. Now, however, before Sloterdijk talks about Nietzsche, he indeed refers to Darwin, and he says, yeah, Darwin was an important cut in the 19th century where basically it was shown that humans are not characterized by reason and unreason, but rather by civilized and uncivilized. And the uncivilized part is their strange cousin, the chimpanzee, I guess. And humans are just hominidae and belong to that race and particularly distinguishing themselves through developing theories of learning, developing cultures. And he says here concretely, instead of the tension between unreason and reason, we now have the antagonism of wilderness and civilization. Sloterdijk packs this also into the Greek terms of Dionysianism and Apollinian powers, while Dionysus is the friend of I don't know how you say it in English, the rush, the kind of drug-induced state where you just enjoy the vital powers of your imagination, I guess. And Apollon is like more the force of reason that tries to orient you towards the future. So, however, what is important here is that Nietzsche now sees that this kind of self-breeding is a kind of progressive self-abnegation. Now, I'm not entirely clear what self-abnegation is, but I think it's like a kind of negation of who one is in themselves and who one is, and an identity of making one modest. We basically see this here in the quote. At bottom, these simple ones want one simple thing, that no one harm them. To them, virtue is whatever makes modest and tame. This is how they made the wolf into a dog, and mankind himself into mankind's favorite pet. So humans basically become domesticated animals. And who's the domesticator? Humans themselves, or as Foucault would say, a kind of anonymous power and anonymous force. And Sloterdijk now involves more concepts in this overarching frame, and he wants to talk about the conditio humana, the condition of what makes us human. And he thinks one of the major characteristics is the so-called neoteny. We will talk about that in the sentence, but let's first follow the order of the concepts he develops. So, okay, we have the king of households, pets, that's now the human being, and they develop different generations that all build on one nest that is culture. And a characteristic is that these are not optimally adapted for external nature who survive anymore, the individuals in these nests, but rather the specimen that do well in internal conditions. These are the living beings who distinguish themselves by their exceptional agility, their increased capacity to learn, their engaging sociability, and finally by their bioaesthetic advantages. So bioaesthetic advantages is like the more beautiful you look like, right? So there are nest-building creatures, particularly birds provide a natural historical prelude to this. But even individual reptiles, such as the well-known Mexican salamander, retain their larval form for the duration of their lives, as do those particular mammals that are able to offer a high standard of nest security and parental care to their young. In the case of such living organisms, biologists have observed a complex of characteristics that since the late 19th century were described by the term neoteny. That is, the retention of juvenile features, or were described with the concept of pedomorphism. This includes the trend toward accelerated births, which leads to the emergence of quite immature young, a feature that is inconceivable without the luxury of a secure nest. So, I mean, a bit I have the question here, what is first, the nest or the premature features? I think Sloterdijk presents it here in a sense that nests favor this kind of neoteny so that people retain or keep more of their features that they have in their childhood, and we look younger and younger. So it is basically what he describes here as a prolonged juvenile phase, but also paradoxically entails that specimen that are mature in the biological sense die off, while premature larval or fetal forms acquire a monopoly on sexual reproduction. Now, the way I understand that transferred to cultures is that the learning state, which is usually the development state, will be preserved, so it will not be given up. And in that sense, evolution favors the ones that are more agile and more adaptable in terms of their cultural internal conditions. And so it favors the ones that always learn, but also the younger ones. And that has as a consequence that humans never mature. There is no transition from unreason to reason in a sense. There's just the prison cell of lifelong learning. that we represent a species of culturally and biologically successful fetal primates who, despite their juvenilization, form a species capable of sexual reproduction. So this is kind of the paradoxical state in which we are, and he calls it the neotenic condition of human species who have a biological nest privilege. It has since been very clearly recognized how culture as a whole functions like an immersive incubator that envelops its members. Second, through these reflections, it becomes clear that human sapiens, Homo sapiens, is dependent on cultural guidance for even its motivational disposition. After the breakdown of a purely biological programming of orientation due to its extreme neoteny, the instinctive framework of Homo sapiens no longer guides from within and loses the firm linking of brain and environment. So yeah, what happens is basically that humans now cannot even be motivated by external standards of the environment anymore, but that they need guidance, they need a good shepherd, they need to be sheep. Symbolic order, and Galen described that as the symbolic ordering systems disburden all human young of the insoluble problem of having to create experiences and discoveries of their ancestors over again all by themselves. Okay, I don't understand this part here, but the unburdening of Galen means basically that we live in an environment that is secured by culture, a nest, so we don't have to go through the learning phases of our ancestors anymore. And we will always be weakened and soft in these external conditions and can only survive in the nest of our culture. On the other hand, this theory reveals that human beings can never be educated enough because their entry into the house of symbolic orderings forever remains a labile operation susceptible to disruption. Psychologists today are especially aware of this and increasingly warn us of the dangers with the weakening of symbolic authority in postmodern society. Yeah, so it is an interesting text, I must say that. So far, reading Sloterdijk, what happened in the 20th century. It seems the 20th century revealed how our cultures become more and more an incubator where humans are enveloped in a nest that is entirely surrounding us and that won't release us anymore with its authority structures and lifelong learning that a lot of people hail and perform every day on the internet is actually one of its consequences. We are always immature and have to mature with an uncertain goal, a meaninglessness that always forces us to develop according to the internal conditions of our culture that at some point can also be chosen arbitrarily. So far for that, if you enjoyed this kind of reading and if you have any comments, then please write that down in the comments or subscribe and follow me more. I would really appreciate that. I already have 88 subscribers. I mean, I also have another channel, but this here is just for assisted reading. That means readings as I have done. Maybe also watching videos. Assisted watching may also be one of these. So if you're interested in these, then I would really appreciate if you follow me. Live long and learn more and prosper.